In today's show, we're going to have a huge battle. We are going to pit the human brain against the computer. Who will win? Tune in to another episode of Computer Train and let's see.
It's time for Computer Train, the weekly TV program that trains you how to use your computer. With your host, El Paso Community College faculty member Russ Myers.
All right, in today's show, it's not really going to be a battle between the brain and the computer. What I'm really trying to get across in this show, which I've kind of explained in many shows about the differences between what the human brain does as opposed to how computers get things done. All right? It's very important that we start attacking the computer in the way that they solve problems, not the way the human brain is. The human brain is much better at certain things, but it also kind of betrays you when you start interacting with the computer. So the first thing I'm going to do is give you a couple of examples that are pretty common on the internet to show you the differences of how the human brain works. Okay, so this first one, we have human brain versus computer kind of example. And this is just a paragraph, and maybe to allow the audience to read it, we could just zoom in a little bit better into the paragraph. So if you look at this paragraph, the nature of the paragraph is every single word is misspelled. And the research that's been found is that as long as the first and last letters are correct, you can jumble the other letters in any order that you want. And there's several examples of this on the internet. I found some examples where you can actually remove the letters entirely, or some of the letters entirely, or actually flip the letters so an E is backwards. Our brain can flip it correctly so we can still read the words. All right, so if we were to engage in this paragraph as humans, we would still be able to read it because of the power of the human brain. So I couldn't believe that I could actually understand what I was reading, okay, using the incredible power of the human mind. And it was some research at Cambridge University. Once again, it explains it doesn't matter what order the letters are in as long as the first and last letter are correct. I want to draw your attention to one important sentence at the very end. This is because the human mind does not read every letter, okay? And there's the key difference of some of the things that I want to explain today. The human brain does not do that. It's intuitive, okay? But it looks at the word as a whole. So looking at the word as a whole, it can correct the letters, okay? As opposed to what a computer would do. If I had the same type of paragraph for a computer, it wouldn't read the words. It would start comparing the letters. So it would say I, then it would read this, and right here where the D is missing, right there the computer would stop and essentially not understand what you're telling it to do. It doesn't matter if everything else in the paragraph is correct. Now, of course, there's certain examples where, depending on how the particular application was programmed, we can handle things like that. But I just want to make sure you understand some of the key differences of what the human mind can do as opposed to what computers do. And understanding that will help you as you interact with computers in all of these various examples. All right, let me give you another example. Very simple paragraph here, okay? What you want to do is figure out how many times the letter F shows up in the paragraph. Okay, give just a couple of seconds to read that. Finished files are the result of years of scientific study combined with the experience of years. So not even a lot of words, not a lot of sentences, and very small amount of letters. But all the people, including myself, okay, so this happens to me also, including myself, most people come up with that there are 3 F's in that paragraph. And it's pretty easy to spot them. We have the F in the word finished, we have an F there in the word files, and there's another one right here in the word scientific. So most people that I've asked to read this, and including myself, come up with the number 3. That is incorrect, however. And it really doesn't matter how many times you look at it, because what is happening is you're looking at it with your mind as opposed to really what you need to do to get the correct answer. Okay, so usually what happens to people is they'll skip this F right here. They'll skip this F. And there's one more. They will skip this F. And the reason that they are skipping that F, even though it is clearly there, is that in those words, the F is not making our standard F sound that we're familiar with. It's actually making a V sound. So when we get to that and we say it to ourselves of, it doesn't click that that was the letter F. So our brain completely skips that. Okay, so this is the opposite example. If you had a computer count the number of F's, you would absolutely get the correct answer. Because in comparison with the way brains work and the way computers work, what a computer would do is not, once again, not read the word. It would compare every single letter. So it would start with this letter. It would count that. No, no, no. And it would just keep on going one character at a time. Yes, so now it's up to 2. No, no. On and on and on. One character at a time, one character at a time. And it would absolutely come up with the correct answer of 6 as opposed to 3. Okay, so once again, I'm trying to give you examples of how the brain works as opposed to understanding how the computer works to help us in all these examples. So the idea for this show came up, this week and the last week, where most of my ideas sometimes come from my interaction with people where they ask me to help them with things that they can't figure out. So I grabbed a couple of those examples, came up with some other things to show you. So this first one I'm going to show you is a Visual Basic Programming class example where I was helping a student who was getting an error on a program. I don't want to talk about computer programming. That's kind of a higher level. It's very finite, but it does lend itself that that student was having a problem with this same example about characters. Okay, so let me bring that onto the screen for you. Okay, so here is a little bit of Visual Basic Programming. And once again, I don't want to explain Visual Basic Programming right now. Maybe in another episode when we have about 50 episodes that I can do. All right, so in this example, we have in programming what's called an if and if structure. Okay, related to computers, you have to tell the computer where the structure starts, and you do that by spelling out the word if. Pretty simple. So it knows that this is the start of the structure. It's very important for the computer to know when the end of that particular structure is. Just quickly, that structure is used to allow us to give the computer a question and execute 2 different things. We've done if statements in Microsoft Excel, and it's pretty much the same thing. But what the student didn't notice here, if you can zoom in just a little bit right there, is what's the problem right there? Once again, an example of I'm just describing is they accidentally typed the N twice. So the computer cannot read that. Essentially what happens is it sees the E, the N, the D. It looks up essentially in its dictionary of its words and to see if it can find E, N, N, D. It does not find that, so it doesn't try to figure it out or anything like that, like the brain does. It just tells you that's incorrect. So in this example, all the student had to do was get rid of one of those N's, and it works just fine. Okay, a little bit down below, they had another problem. If we can zoom in just a little bit right here, you'll notice that in Visual Basic, this line starts with a single quote. That single quote is to tell the computer that this is not a computer statement, that it is a little bit of documentation where we're describing what goes on in the paragraph. So this line did have it. What the student assumed is that they could continue the statements on the next line without having to put that symbol. That's incorrect. If you're going to start another line of documentation, you need to tell it that symbol every single time. If you don't, once again, it tries to find these words in its vocabulary. The minute it finds a word that does not exist, you get an error message. So another example of the specifics of computer. What changes this? All we had to do to fix it was put a single quote in front of that line. Okay, another example. We've done Microsoft Excel examples in Computer Train. So I had a file where we were practicing some functions that I've done. In fact, I think in future shows I'm going to do some nested functions. I think we're ready for those at this point. A little bit more complicated, but if we have the fundamentals, it shouldn't be too bad. All right, so in this spreadsheet, very simple, what we were trying to do is we had a list of employees and we were trying to figure out how many eligible years of retirement that the employee had. Okay, and if you look at their calculations, obviously we don't have to be Excel experts to understand, no, the person did not have 42,000 years of experience. Okay, so if we look at that formula, Okay, to compute, there's a couple of ways to do this, but the simplest way that I have for my students to do it is you take the current date, so the date that we're in that particular company. We subtract the date that that employee was hired. If you recall from previous episodes of Excel, dates are stored as numbers. So when we subtract those two numbers, we get the number of days between those dates. If you take the number of days and you divide by 365, that will convert the number to years. But here's an example where the symbols that they forgot to put in relate to mathematical principles that I've described. Here we have subtraction and division. We learned order of operation probably back in 5th or 6th grade, that when we have equations like this, division is ahead of subtraction. So what the computer is doing is dividing first and then subtracting. That's incorrect. We need to subtract first and then divide. So in this example, we're missing two very simplistic symbols. We're missing parentheses. If I put an open parentheses right there and a closing parentheses right there, now I'm telling the computer that I want to subtract first and then divide. Then we can copy that formula all the way down. And you see the difference here. So what I want you to keep thinking about is, what is the big difference in all of these little examples? The big difference is maybe 1, 2, 3 different symbols that you're not putting in that require the computer to work properly. In this next example, another easy fix to something where a student couldn't figure it out. If you look at the results of this formula here, it's a big mess. These are all Excel generated errors, all sorts of problems here. So in this formula, what we did is we need to compute how much money the person would get with their retirement severance. A lot of companies start that. They have a retirement plan based upon how many years. If you elect to go with the plan, they have an X number of dollars that you would get. All right, so it's pretty simplistic. We have a table of the severances. Okay, here's the years, and then here's the amount that the person would get. So the formula is based upon the years, which we calculated correctly now by putting the parentheses. Now we take that particular number and we see where it falls in the table, and then we return the value. Okay, just like we would do it long before Excel was created. So let's take a look at this formula. And this time I'm going to open it up in a dialog box because it's a little bit more complicated function. We actually used VLOOKUP in a previous Excel show. It's a very common function, very useful. All right, in order to look up a value in a table, it's just like we would look it up in a table. The first argument is the value would take to the table. So we're pointing to C4, which for this person is the 22. So that's working correctly. We need to point to the number of years that the employee was with the company. So that's fine. The second argument, or the second question right here, is where is the table that we're going to use for the VLOOKUP? So as I just pointed out, it's in this range right here, F4 to G9. Okay, so far so good. That is typed correctly. The problem for this student came up in this next argument, column index number. Essentially what that is for VLOOKUP is once Excel finds the proper row, it needs to know which column has the information you're trying to retrieve for the formula. So in our table, we're trying to retrieve the severance numbers. The columns are counted from left to right, starting with 1. So this would be column 1. This would be column 2. And if you had lots of other columns, you just keep counting. Column 3, 4, 5, 6, depends on how many columns in your table. So we need the values back from column 2. But the student, what did they type? They typed in a 3. Why is that an error? Because Excel can see how many columns there are, and it says, okay, give me a number, and it can be a 1 or a 2 because you have a 2-column table. You can't give the computer column 3. I couldn't tell somebody, hey, find the values in this 2-column table and look at column 9. They would say, what are you talking about? You can't say 9th column if you only have 2 columns. Once again, one little thing is causing a problem here. Once I tell the computer, it's not column 3, obviously. That column doesn't even exist in this example. It's column 2. Okay, so then we can click OK. We've got to change these to absolutes so that we can copy the formula. But now everything will work just fine. Okay, so a person that's been with the company 5 years would get 11,500, so the computer is looking it up precisely. Okay, so again, continue with the theme that I'm trying to get across here. Most of you are not used to interacting with things that are this specific. You interact with humans the most, and I have already discussed we're intuitive, we can understand. My Spanish is not that good, but if I spoke to someone that understood Spanish, no matter what I say, they pretty much can figure out what I'm trying to say. Computers do not work like that. All right, one last example. This was a friend of mine, an older friend, which is they're kind of fun to help because they, obviously most of their lives they have grown up without computers, and now everything is smartphones, computers, and tablets that we've discussed, so they're kind of wary of how it all works. All right, this is not the real email address because I don't want everybody to start emailing this person. All right, so my friend came to me and said, hey, can you figure this out? I keep sending emails to my wife, but she doesn't get any. All right, that is a very simplistic problem. I already know it's going to be some kind of typo problem. All right, so when I looked at the address right off the bat, I'm looking to see, do they have this correct? A lot of people type this part incorrectly. So they'll type Yahoo with only one O, or they'll misspell it. All right, so the person spelled this correctly. So the only other thing to confirm here is, did your wife sign up in Google? It's not a Yahoo, it's not a Hotmail account. It is through Gmail. That is the correct address. So we confirmed that, and that was correct. The problem came in with the username. And this is another example where the brain is going to portray you. Just like we described in that counting the number of F's. The way we do things as opposed to the way the computer does things. So my friend calls his wife Abby, all right, which is A-B-B-Y. So when he typed in the email address into his smartphone, he typed A-B-B-Y Gale for Abigail. There's only one problem. That's not how her actual name is spelled. Her actual name is A-B-I-G-A-L, Abigail, not Abigail. But the point is, how did that extra B-Y get in there? And it's back to the human brain. My last name is spelled M-Y-E-R-S. Every time I fill out something, for them to have mail, I always spell my own name correctly. But then when I get things in the mail, it almost invariably will say M-E-Y-E-R-S. Where did that E, that extra E, come from? It came from the user who's typing in the information, and instead of specifically looking at what's written on the paper, they are inserting a letter. Okay? By doing that, they're causing errors just like this, just like formulas, all sorts of different places. All right, so for the most part, this has not been too big of a deal. It's not going to hurt you. Hopefully, I've shown you some examples of, if there is a problem with the computer, I promise you it's going to be related to specifics, down to the last character. But there are times where it can be a little bit dangerous. So I wanted to show you some examples of those. Okay, so I want to discuss something called typo squatting. Okay, it also is, it's on the same thing of what I'm talking about, some other names, URL hijacking. If you remember from previous computer train, a URL is a web address essentially. Brand jacking, this is a computer brand where you're hijacking the computer brand. And essentially down to what this is all about. This is about fake URLs. Without going into the full process, if you want to start your own web address, you can. You have to go to a business and you tell them what the address is. So what these squatters do is they will buy all of the invalid with having one or two letters from an actual web address. So the person will be taken there. So in a web browser, so you're on Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or the Apple version, a user is taken to an alternative website when they accidentally type in the actual website incorrectly. All right, so what do we mean by that? So let's say we had a website where it's example.com. And remember, This is computers, so don't even say the word example. Say EXAMPLE period COM. If you start doing that, you'll understand what I'm talking about here. All right, so some common things that could go wrong. So somebody, you know, this happens a lot in El Paso, maybe not spelling English words properly, having one or two letters off. Again, doesn't make a big deal in most places. With computers, it's a huge deal. So they might misspell the word. Instead of EXA, they type EXE. Or they have typos on the other side. It's PLE, not LPE. Okay, maybe they insert the letter S. So they got it pretty close, but they have one extra S in there. I went to Irvin High School. Every time someone speaks to me and repeats what I said, they always say Irving. I didn't go to Irving with a G. I went to Irvin. I-R-V-I-N. There's no G. Okay? This is a big one where they don't get the domain correctly. They spelled the word correctly, but instead of a .com, they put a .org. Okay, so in most cases, that's not going to be a big problem. You'll get an error message. It'll just say this website does not exist. But if somebody has grabbed that URL with those specific letters, there's a variety of things that can happen. All right, so what we want to talk about here when you fill things out, and I've given you this on another show, is an example called stop, drop, and scroll. Okay, so what the stop means is when you're doing things that are important, you have to stop for a moment and take a closer look. Okay, that's the spelling of the F's. How many were there? There are not 3, there were 6. Okay, so before executing some command, typing in a web address, typing in an email address, filling out your contacts on your cell phone, a million other examples, stop for a second and take a look at it. The drop part is related to most dialog boxes, how we fill out things on a computer. We fill them out with text boxes where we type text. There might be check boxes, yes or no. There are option buttons, there are drop-down menus, there's all sorts of things that we need to check before we execute that command. Okay, the scroll part relates to scroll bars. On that particular screen that you're filling out, are you forgetting something? So if there are scroll bars, we've described in Computer Train, that indicates that you have to scroll to see further information. Most forms are not like that, but you know, there's a million examples on the computer. All right, one last little tip for you on this whole thing about being very specific, which I've stressed in all the shows I've ever done, but trying to kind of put it together here. Here I'm in File Explorer where we talked about deleting files, renaming files, those kinds of things. All right, this is about being specific of understanding the rules of computers. Here I have some information on my flash drive, and I have a file here that I'm going to delete. That is a common task you do on drives. When you no longer need a file, you might delete it. Okay, so very simple. I'm going to right-click on that file and then delete it. So I'm deleting the Excel formulas file. Okay, I want you to notice this word. This is another thing people don't pay attention to with computers. Are you sure you want to permanently delete? They didn't just put that word for the fun of it. That's very important. So as an average user, I would say, yes, that's the file permanently. And so what happens invariably is people want to get that file back. But that message was not kidding around. In my intro class, I asked the students, have you ever heard about the recycle bin? Of course, quite a few hands go up, and I have one of them describe it. The recycle bin is a place where a deleted file will go where you can restore it. Perfect. So I have them go to the recycle bin. By the way, in here, by default, not all of the locations are showing. Recycle bin does not show by default. So over here in the white space, I can right-click, and I can show all the folders. All right, now if we look down there, I have the recycle bin. So I have my entire class delete a file from their flash drive and go to the recycle bin. And then I say, okay, there's your file to restore. And what am I trying to show to them? There is no file to restore. The recycle bin concept is associated with the hard drive. It is not associated with removable media that are electronic like a flash drive. It works on external hard drives, it works on your hard drive, places like that. But it does not work on your flash drive. So there's nothing to recycle. Once again, I'm trying to get them to start understanding this whole specific type of item. All right, the other show that I showed you was deleting from OneDrive. When you delete from OneDrive, if you have it associated with File Explorer, you could get it from the recycle bin, but I'm going to say that I'm using the app and I don't have it in my file manager. So let me delete a file here. Okay, so I'm going to delete the Russ M Week 14 picks. That's where I'm picking the football game winners. All right, so if you need to get that file back and you don't have access to it on your computer, you can go to the internet and you can go to OneDrive on the internet. So I would go to onedrive.live.com. If you're doing this on your cell phone or some other computer, you do have to log in with your Windows login. I'm already connected through the EPCC network. And what you notice there is that on the internet, I also have that same concept, recycle bin. Okay, so I could go to the recycle bin on the internet, and I have that file. There it is. Okay, so if you delete from OneDrive, you can get them back, and if you don't have access to your account on your computer, you can still get it back through the internet on any internet computer device. Well, I hope you got the point of this show. The point of this show was computers work down to the last character and have some key concepts that they operate on. If you interact with a computer like you interact with humans, there's going to be a mistake. Most of you are cell phone, text messengers, and Facebookers where you type whatever and there's no big deal. That doesn't work in most places on the computer. So I want you to start studying and I want you to get a little bit more specific, and I'll give you some more tips on the next episode of Computer Train.